Today, we are joined by Gus Zhu, the first Chinese master of wine, a leading wine scientist and expert educator. From decoding the chemistry of wine and food science, Gus brings a unique blend of science and passion to the wine industry. He released his new book, Behind the Glass, studies the chemical and sensorial terroir of wine tasting, aka the chemistry, or why we smell what we smell or taste what we taste. Get ready for an insightful conversation as we dive into the world of food science, wine, and chemistry through the lens of a master. Let's get into it. Hey guys, what's up? We're here with another episode. We're here with the first Chinese master of wine, Gus. First and foremost, I need you guys to smash that subscribe button if you guys want me to keep bringing you new guests from all different walks of life. So first and foremost, he just published his new book. So Gus, maybe you can talk a little bit about your book and who you are, but let's start with your background, a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm Gus Zhu. I'm from China. And people may wonder, oh, how did you get into wine as a Chinese, right? That's not part of our culture, but we have alcohol culture. In China, we have the national drink called the baijiu, which is a hard liquor, like vodka, tequila-like, and usually it's 50% above alcohol by volume. Yeah. But it makes sense because in China, we eat rice. But in some lands where you cannot grow rice, you grow sorghum. And you turn that sorghum, if you turn sorghum into like bread or something, it's kind of hard and it's not that tasty. But you turn the starch in the sorghum into alcohol, to a distilled high-proof alcohol, right? It makes sense. Yeah, you had a hard liquor and the government can get the tax and everything makes sense. So since childhood, I was immersed in that kind of alcohol smell. Sometimes I found it revolting at the dinner table with all the adults over there. Yeah. But most of the time, I find it fascinating because the aroma is just so strange and exotic. So, and then I got to university, and our professor, I studied horticulture, and one of our professors, she grew grapes. She studied the genetics of grapes, and she held a wine appreciation class. So I got into the wine world when I was tasting wines in her class.
How was your exposure there? Obviously, you're in China, so your closest wine regions are what? Europe, I guess, versus like New World. So like, how was that introduction? Like, do you guys having wines of the world, or are you specifically sticking to Europe?
Yeah, so it was during a time that when I was in college is around Olympics times. Of course, Olympics time is 2008 when most of the country in the world had problem. We had a recession, but that's actually during the period of time when China actually withheld the recession and also grow really fast. And that time we have many more interesting imported wines from Europe, from America, from Australia, from all sorts of countries. That's interesting because in the past, let's say when I was a kid, if people drink some wine, it's through not in mainland, but through Hong Kong's influence. And there people used to drink Lafite and Petrus and mix with Coca-Cola, Pepsi. So you're mixing like $2,000 per bottle with Pepsi and they drink it, right? But why? Because most red wines, when people first approach it, is acidic, it's tannic. So people mix up with sweet drinks, right? That's the human nature, human's palate nature. But then during Olympic times and further, when I got into wine industry, when I graduated, we really saw a boom of good value wines got imported to China, and also China started to produce more and more better domestic wines as well, so that we can taste them, not spending lots of money, and people really start to appreciate this drink as a type of lifestyle product.
It seems like within a short period of time, the wine culture in China shifted very quickly. And do you contribute that directly to the economic boom that was happening?
I contribute that to China, because China and Chinese people, everything, we just do things, and we do things very fast. We learn things very fast. If you think about the real estate market, which is now in a recession, but during those years, oh my God, overnight you see another building, skyscraper, everything. So in China, we just do things, and people really learn things quickly. It could be too rushed at the beginning, but now we can just think about what makes sense and really implement things, including I mentioned domestic wines in China. They got huge improvement in the past 5 to 10 years simply because we used to do things that we copy everything from the outside world without really looking at our own terroir. But now people examine the soil, the climate, and everything carefully within China, and we do it rather fast. So now we are having better and better quality wines from China, even though that's not the best climate for growing grapes, but we do get better and better wines over there.
Okay, so we'll talk about that like a little bit later today. But so your background, what part of China are you from?
So I'm from Nanjing, which is not far from Shanghai. Shanghai is one of the major cities, right? It's like Manhattan, New York City of China. And the capital is called Beijing. Beijing means the North Jing. And Nanjing is the South Jing. And Nanjing used to be the capital city of 6 dynasties in the past.
Yeah.
So it's either the North Jing or the South Jing. But now it's the North Jing, Beijing as the capital of China.
Okay. So being in China, like, how do you end up, because you go to university, it sounds like in China, you study horticulture, and you get exposed to wine while going through the program. Sounds like a wine appreciation type class. So what makes you come to America?
So I started to work in really great wine company back then. It doesn't sell any bottle of wine, doesn't sell a single drop of wine. It's all about education and consultancy, founded by a British couple with Cambridge background. And they're really wine experts, and they are also masters of wines now. I worked with them, had the most wonderful time, but at one point I said to them saying, I got to learn something that I cannot learn in China. I could learn that in China, which is basically viticulture winemaking, grape growing and winemaking degree in the university. In China, we have this kind of good program in China, but I really want to learn it in a non-China environment. So I was thinking about maybe going to France, but I need to learn French. And also going to Australia, but it's not the correct season.
Yeah.
No, I shouldn't say correct. It's just like
It's flip-flop.
At that time, it's a bit tricky. Apply for the schools in the States first, in the US first. And the best school is UC Davis for winemaking program. So I applied for it. I didn't think I could get in, but they got me in, and that's how I came to the States to study winemaking. But then, after 2 years, I decided to do some other things rather than winemaking.
Okay. So, but you finished, right? Like you have your degree.
I have my degree, and this program, they really want you to finish. So in school, I think all the classes and all the lab work and all the practical winemaking, grape growing, everything, they're excellent courses, and they really connect to the practical wine industry. Okay. That's what I really appreciate. It was beyond my expectation in terms of what I've learned. But finally, and also through that program, luckily, I also found my real interest, which is more about the research academic side on chemistry, but also more importantly, in sensory science.
Which goes hand in hand with his book that he wrote. So we'll get there. He's jumping ahead a lot. Did you like jump from studying wine? Like now you're a master of wine, right? You've made a big hop. Like you're a very, very studious person. So like where does that influence kind of come from that you have like this thirst for knowledge?
It's not my thirst. I thirst for good wines to drink. Yeah. For knowledge, I think it's just being Chinese, because in China, there's a fundamental culture that I found many people did outside of Asia, East Asia, they didn't realize that in China, Japan, Korea, we all have this kind of culture that you have to study hard simply because your parents told you that if you do not study hard and get into a better university, you will fail for the rest of your life. That kind of makes sense in China, because in China, with so many population, how will you actually, separate yourself and just stand out? We have one thing called the college entry exam. So we have to work our ass off for that college entry exam, especially in high school years. For that 3 years, almost every day we only have like 5 hours of sleep. Every day we woke up at 6 a.m. And then we go to school 7:30 and started to do 5 different subjects of courses in the morning, 4 each in the afternoon, and all mock exams, everything every day. And some students, I'm the lazier one, I study until probably 10 or 11 p.m. Some students study until 1 or 2 a.m. It's essentially military training for that college entry exam. I encourage people to search all these kind of YouTube videos on like China college exam, how students, how hard it was. So to me, studying wine is much more relaxing. And even for the Master of Wine program, people say, oh, it's so, you need to spend so much time. But I tell you, as compared to the prep for the college entry exam, is nothing. Coincidentally, the days of Master of Wine exam, which is a British system, right? But they held in 3 different venues every year: Australia, UK, and here in the US. And we do the exam. And every year is somewhere early to mid-June, which overlap the college entry exam days in China. And this, for my real big exam for the Master of Wine, is 4 consecutive days, which is exactly like the college entry exam in China.
So you basically took the same test again, but you had more fun doing it, sounds like.
Oh, come on. We have, like, at least for the first 3 days in the morning, we have 12 wines to blind taste. It's kind of tough, but hey, at the end of every blind tasting exam, you can just enjoy a glass of the wine you like or 2.
How does a blind tasting work for the Master of Wine exam? Like how much percentage do you have to get right, or what's passing for that?
That's where it gets interesting. So Master of Wine is different from the Master Sommelier exam, which is also different from most of the wine exams out there in terms of tasting, okay? Most of the wine tasting exam out there, they look for a structure, and you need to sort of describe correctly what the sweetness, sugar level in the wine is, what the alcohol level in the wine is, and then you make conclusions on what's the grape variety, which region, which country this wine came from, which vintage, blah, blah, blah. But that part vary in the Master of Wine exam. I'll tell you an example, right? So for the most classic wines, like let's say we are now in Napa. So for Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon, which is considered one of the most classic wines, you have to nail it is from Napa, it's a Cabernet Sauvignon, by writing all the reasons, right? It has the tannin, it has the oak, it has the fruit and all that. But for certain wines nowadays, such as certain natural wines, or certain wines that it's just almost impossible to taste the grape and the origin, they put more marks on the commercial potential of this wine and the winemakings behind this wine when you taste this wine. Does it make sense?
Yes.
So it's more about they position different wine in different categories of questions. Whatever makes more sense to the wine itself, rather than saying, oh, this is a natural wine that nobody can taste the grape variety, but you have to nail the variety with your luck. So it's different from blind tasting games where people say, oh, I guess a variety and I'm a winner. That's fun, but that's not for Master of Wine exam.
Okay, so it sounds like Master of Wine has business a little bit more incorporated in it, like as far as like what's the end goal of the wine, in a sense?
It's more about when you taste a glass of wine, what's the significance or potential significance behind it, whether it's a commercial potential or the winemaking, so that we can think more of that to improve the industry and think about the direction and future of this industry.
Okay, and do you mention that in the sense that the winemaking, that wow, this is a very beautiful wine in the way that it was made, and then versus like doing volume and going commercial? Is that what you mean, kind of like the difference being?
Yeah, and also let's do a simple example such as Chardonnay, right? There are Chardonnays that are oaked and it tastes buttery, creamy, vanilla, balm, all that. And there are also Chardonnays in the world that's what we call the unoaked style, which is like refreshing and a lovely fruit without so much of the creamy yogurty taste, right? when you taste these kind of Chardonnays in the exam, you taste that and you write about the possible winemaking steps behind it, that you can differentiate these kind of winemaking techniques. And they both exist for Chardonnay, but some buttery Chardonnay, creamy Chardonnay are more popular in certain market, and some are popular in other market, and it could flip in the future. So in this exam, you just need to taste as many wines as possible from all over the world to really understand these kind of differences and the trend and the potential in these kind of winemaking or in these kind of commercial positions.
So what really inspired you to get your Master of Wine then? Was it that you were already like halfway there doing certifications? You're like, I'm just going to do it, or?
Okay, so that's back to Davis time. So when I studied winemaking, grape growing at Davis, I was just thinking about, in the future, I want to do academic world in chemistry and in sensory. However, I didn't choose to do Master of Wine. In the last year at Davis, they say, by the way, we have, not Davis, but on the UK side, they announced something called, by the way, we're going to do the first session of introduction to the Master of Wine program at Robert Mondavi Winery. And it costs somewhere like $200. I pay for it because I want to meet people and I want to go to Mondavi, and there are 2 dinners, and each dinner is amazing food and with like 60s, 70s, 80s aged Tocolon Cabernet from Robert Mondavi. I'm so gonna go there and just mingle with people and have dinner. And then at the end, they said, by the way, the $200 you pay also include the entry exam. So of course, everybody sit there and I'm like, okay, I just write something. And if I got in, I got in. If I didn't, And I seriously, I
know, I believe you. It's just funny.
And I sat and wrote the entry exam, and I got accepted into the MW program. Nice. Otherwise, I would try to find some work, not only in wine, but maybe in food, beverage, or even cosmetic industry on improving my sensory science skills. But then, because I got into Master of Wine right after Davis, I spent 2 to 3 years-ish in United States and also traveling around to learn everything in order to pass the Master of Wine exam. So as soon as I passed the exam and did my research paper on the Master of Wine, COVID hit. Then I got back to China to help the company I worked for 2 years, but now I came back to work in my real field passion of chemistry and the sensory.
So backtracking a little bit, part of your master's at Davis, so what type of research did you do?
At Davis, as I mentioned, it's really more of a practical program. They really want to incubate the future winemakers or researchers, right? So what we did are not necessarily lots of hardcore research, but we participated in almost everything. So I participated in lots of sensory studies, and also almost like each quarter, for each class, we have something that we need to do, either a review paper or something like that. So I did the microbiological review paper for wine microbiology class on a type of yeast, which they actually use a lot in brewing nowadays because it can increase the acid in beer, in certain type of beer, right? Sour, all that. It's a long name, Cluveromyces lachantiae, something like that. Or thermal tolerance, they have different names. Also, for my real review paper for my Davis graduation, I did a paper on the red wine color pigments, especially in comparison in between young red wines versus as red wine ages, how the chemistry of the color changes. And then my professor think that's kind of interesting review. And then the chemistry professor, Dr. Andrew Waterhouse, started to approach me saying, hey, we should do a review paper on wine pigments together. So I I co-published a review paper on red wine pigments with Dr. Waterhouse. And then I went into Master of Wine. Master of Wine require, the last step is they require the research paper that you came up with a topic.
So you'd already done it?
So no, not that. You'd have to came up with a topic, a new one. So I came up with the topic of adjusting the acidity, because in winemaking you can just adjust the acidity a tiny little bit, right, to change the sensory profile. So I play around with acid adjustment in the white wine, and I did a full sensory study, and I wrote that Master of Wine research paper.
And then with like doing all this research and stuff, have you helped other winemakers or scientists get new ideas about how to do these processes? Because there's multiple people that will work on the science behind or like write papers on the same subject, right? Yeah. So are you helping move things along in that world?
No, simply because especially what we study at Davis is more about you study every single subject that's related to wine. If you really can be in a position of consulting and helping people, you gotta be very specialized in something. So now I'm only at the early stage of really trying to be more specialized in sensory science. Maybe after 5 to 10 years, I can start to consult some people on something for the sensory part. You see what I mean? Yeah. So it's a very practical program, but I'm not in the position. Maybe I can give some advice on certain little things, but I'm not a proper full consultant for a special subject such as sensory science to winemakers out there.
Let's talk about America. So what were your first impressions of the United States as you came here from China? Because have you been here before?
I've been here only once. Actually, that one time I went straight to Napa.
Ah, okay. So you've been to Napa before?
Yes, because I was an educator, wine educator back then. So I attended the Napa Valley Wine Educator Program organized by Napa Valley Vintners. And so I got the chance to travel over here and really see San Francisco, Napa, the Bay Area. As I officially moved to the United States, start to live and study over here, of course, I bet most Chinese students felt that way, is that the food is so boring over here.
But why do you say that? Like, it's not spicy, it's not like interesting, or it's all kind of copy and paste everywhere?
Of course, in California, it's different, right? We could find a diversity of food. But if you just think about American food, like, it's just so boring. And it's a fact, because America has a shorter history of the country and of the food culture, right? But China, if you look at China, it's bigger than Europe, right? If you combine most of the West European countries together, it's even smaller than China in terms of size. And if you think about, if you say, oh, what's Chinese food like? You're essentially asking, what's European food like? We are talking about thousands of different variations. It could be extremely spicy, it could be extremely sweet, it could be extremely savory, it could be anything. And there's a channel I watch. It's actually an expat living in China, and he said, "Oh, people got it on YouTube, and they say, okay, people got it wrong. We try to simplify things, saying China has 8 big different categories of Chinese cuisines. No, actually, if you really dig deeper, it's at least 60 something."
Jesus. And that's through historical influences of different cultures and people who lived in China, went through China, etc., right?
I think it's mostly about China is probably very few country that, of course, in history, it expand and shrink a little bit, expand. When China really expand in Tang and Yuan and in these kind of dynasties, oh my God, you're including all these kind of nomad culture, the very southern culture, the very western culture, the very eastern culture. Again, it's just like if you think about history of Europe, right? How that can diversify. It's just a lot. So for example, I come back to China nowadays as a visitor now, right? Oh my God, I just went to Shanghai, right? A big city. Every day, I eat different types of food. At lunch, I eat a spicy hot pot. At dinner, I eat something light but more savory, the Cantonese style. Next day, I eat the northeast sort of oily and big chunky style. And next day, I went back to something delicate again. It's just every single meal is different.
And you think that doesn't exist in America, even with like food cultures that are brought here by other countries?
It exists, but for example, if you want to eat really authentic Chinese food and even, let's say, really authentic Mexican food, not like Tex-Mex, but just Mexican food, and also really authentic part of Italy, like Piedmont food versus Tuscan food and all that, right? If you go really authentic here, I was a student, and even now, I cannot afford pay for that kind of price every day. I could if I'm a billionaire, and if I have the time to travel to different restaurants every single day. I would love to do that, but people, the majority of people, even the rich people, they cannot have, even they have the money, they don't have the time to do that kind of diversity of food. But in China,
So you mean like accessibility for the everyday person?
Accessibility, yes. Okay. It's like in China, I can just like being lazy, lying in the couch at home or in the hotel, and I do DoorDash in China, and there are like hundreds of choices out there.
Sounds awesome. You make me want to go to China.
Yeah.
So talking about Americans and everything that's wrong with us. So what do you find is unique about American palates and how we, America, as a country, consume wine?
I think American palate really, like Chinese palate, it tied to the history, right? I talked about the diversity of food in China, but I'm actually the weirdo. I'm the minority in China in terms of I really appreciate all sorts of cuisines. But I can see clearly that most people, including my parents, they eat more and they tend to like more of the food where they grew up from. Most people, when they eat, let's say, if you eat non-spicy food, especially in certain southern part of China, for 30 years, when they touch spicy food, they cannot stand that, right? Not even mention like genetics and all that. So in America, I found it similar, right? If you're used to just eating steaks or burger or that kind of pizza, or that kind of food every day, people tend to go for that kind of food, right? And nowadays, again, it's changing a lot because we have a diversity of food, we have lots of fusion cuisines. So I'm really happy to see that a lot of Americans, they start to appreciate the diversity of food, even though sometimes it could be a bit exotic. Some people are willing to try, but if you are not willing to try, it's totally fine. It's personal choice. It's just your preference.
And what about with wine?
Okay, wine is a thing that it has a barrier from the very beginning, right? Because wine is alcohol in the first place. At least 30 to 40% of Americans, and even if we look at the whole population around the world, those people do not drink alcohol for either religious reasons or their palate was born to hate alcohol. Because alcohol is something sharp, right? And some people who have very sensitive palate, genetically, they cannot stand the burn of alcohol. While some other people don't even feel whiskey as any type of burn. So that's the first thing, and then we have the acid and tannins in wine. But most wine are made in the position that really started from the places, especially in European countries, where the wine is an integral part of their lifestyle with food and everything. So when people start to understand and start to try more and more wines, they got used to that and they started to find out what type of wine they actually really like. And that's my learning process. But how to say, the cost, I'm not talking about the cost of money. Of course, you need to spend money drinking wine. I mean the cost of the time and also the chances where you have some people or some scenario, some environment that naturally and comfortably introduce you to the wine world is very rare. And that is why wine, if you are not a European, grew up in the European culture, and even young people in European countries nowadays, they drink less wine. Fewer people drink wine simply because there's not an immersive culture of wine drinking as a kind of exotic adult product. It's just so difficult. So nowadays, those people who try to sell wine, do market on wine, they really try hard to make wine as a relaxing, easy lifestyle product, which it is.
Yeah.
But somehow, like in a way, some people got scared, and people do not feel safe, do not feel confident, do not feel comfortable when they start to shop wine or start to drink wine.
Yeah, or welcomed, because it's like you start buying $5-10 bottles of wine, and it's like, maybe you can talk about this, like kind of elitism that exists in America sometimes with that.
Yeah, but that exists everywhere.
Okay.
But I don't think that's
Unique to America.
unique. But if you think about it, right, the best-selling wines are still those wines in terms of volume, are still those wines. Even some wine experts or some elite people who think they have the elite palate in wine, to say, oh, I don't drink that kind of yellowtail in the supermarket because it's cheap. No, people drink them. People buy tons of them. Why? Simply because it's affordable and it's nice to drink. Those wines were made in the way that makes people happy when they drink it.
And then what about Napa and their winemaking style versus the rest of the world?
It's also changing. If you look at the quintessential Napa style, it was long established by, let's say, wineries like Mondavi, BV back then. Essentially the so-called Bordeaux style, but with the warmer climate, New World expression. And of course, the quality is always there. And it's kind of changing nowadays in terms of people trying to see different consumers prefer different palate. They are all good changes, but ultimately it will be determined by which kind of style can sell well.
What is your life post Master of Wine? Because I mean, I know you kind of downplay it, but it is a big deal, right? Like you're the first Chinese person who's a Master of Wine, right?
Yeah.
And there's also just not a lot of Master of Wines in general.
Yeah, but it's weird because as I mentioned, after I got my Master of Wine, is late 2019.
Okay.
And then COVID hit.
Yeah.
I went back to China. Of course, in the first year, China controlled the virus very well. So I had the most wonderful time there. Not just making some money, but it's more about like really caught up with old friends and made a lot of new friends through drinking. Of course, in the first place, people say, oh, you're the first Chinese master of wine. And people start to approach you. But then you start to drink with them. And for quite many of them, you became drinking buddies. You became friends, which are just super awesome. That really helps. But ultimately, here is the point. Master of Wine is different from Master Sommelier. Because Master Sommelier, the term sommelier, it's a profession. It's a job. Meaning those people who serve on the floor, who recommend wines and sell wines and open wines and serve wines on the floor in a restaurant, in wine bar. Master of Wine is not a specific profession.
It's very open-ended.
Yeah, so you can have all sorts of people who are Master of Wine, right? There are winemakers, there are wine merchants, there are educators, there are researchers, there are even like lawyers who specialize in like wine laws, those kind of things. Yeah. They are Master of Wines. So if you are Master of Wine, the title really gives you the credit of you really have a deeper understanding of the wine world as compared to quite many people. But you also need to consider or try to keep on what you are specialized in. So for example, for me, I got into Master of Wine by chance in the last year at Davis, which is nice because I got through at a pretty early stage in my life. But now actually my brain is more focused on I got to hone my skills in sensory science and in some chemistry part for my current profession.
And then what is your current profession?
So currently, I worked at a company called Harv 81, but it really has two main business over here. One is cork, so we manufacture cork for sealing the wine bottles. The other part is cooperage, which is oak barrel making. So we make oak products, such as oak barrels for matured wines during winemaking, right? For the cork part, I'm the chemist. So in the lab, I analyze this compound that can ruin the entire bottle of wine called TCA. There are other compounds, but mainly TCA. I analyze through machines, gas chromatography, those kind of chemical machines. I analyze them every day for QC, for quality control. So I'm actually the researcher quality controller for the cork side. On the other hand, for the oak side, I'm finally the sensory science part. So I'm the sensory, so almost like a sensory scientist, although I'm kind of far away from that. I need to improve my skills, but I do sensory studies on the aromas in oak and how the aromas in oak barrels, oak, interact with wine.
How do you get samples? Because I know you guys do quality control. So
Yeah.
then, do you guys get clients sending you like freshly bottled wines or things in the past? Or are you guys doing your own bottling?
So most of the cork, they are coming from Portugal. Because Portugal is the main country that produce cork. They have the cork tree, and you get rid of the tree bark. It's a thick tree bark, and you punch it out. It's a piece of cork. So we got the raw materials, and they also clean it. They wash it very carefully, and then send to us. We do some printing and the further treatment that's certain. You can almost imagine it as a wax, sort of waxing and all that to make the cork easy to insert and pull out, all that. And then before that, as soon as we get the whole container of cork from Portugal, from our Portugal factory, we do sampling. So, for example, we pull certain number of corks from the whole one batch, one lot, right? And then we sample them and we soak the cork in wine for over 24 hours. And then I analyze that wine and see if those kind of samples have TCA, have that tainted compound.
And then what if it does?
Then we just say, okay, we have to send the entire bale for that lot back to Portugal. They retreat them, or they even reject some of them. It's mainly retreat them to ensure, like at least for the sampling part, we don't see any TCA.
And then so you guys, when you then sell them to wineries, like do you guys have a guarantee of some sort? Or you guys have like a success rate, I guess if you want to call it that?
Yeah, so nowadays because of these kind of sampling, as we receive the materials, we have much less of the chance of cork taint in wine. I dare say, let's say even 40 or 50 years ago, if you have a case of wine, let's say a case of 12, chances are there's one bottle that might have some degree of cork taint, okay? Nowadays, it's much, much lower. Definitely lower than 1%, okay? But then us and other cork companies, we also have certain corks that have screening process for each individual cork. So mostly by machine, we have like modified version of machine that they screen individual cork for those kind of defects. And that, of course, the wineries usually pay a bit extra for that cork. We even, in our company, we even have sensitive nose people sniffing individual cork for that kind of catching that defect. But because of that, the wineries pay more. So even that, let's say even the cork when they send out, they're clean. Naturally in nature, there is a low chance that you can still start to accumulate TCA compound. So if that happens and winery found them and say, oh, this one unfortunately is tainted, we analyze and confirm it has that kind of fault. And then we refund the retail price of the whole bottle to the winery.
And could you talk a little bit about the oak aging process and kind of generally how that affects the wine?
Okay, so
at the most basic level.
The most basic thing is that oak, sort of have kind of different aroma profile as compared to wine, because wine is more about the fruit, right? More about those kind of profile. But oak can add some smokiness, can add some spice like clove, those kind of things, and also can add things like coconut and vanilla flavor. So for certain wines, people love it, right? In some red wines and in some Chardonnay, some certain white wines, if you add those kind of vanilla-ish, spicy-ish characters, people love them. But oak has other effects, such as oak also have the astringent tannins, but the effect could be minimal if you have a red wine that already has lots of tannins. Another thing is that people believe that through long aging in oak, you will also have the oxidation effect because it can let some oxygen in. So the wine may taste softer and taste more balanced and integrated and rounded out after long-term aging. But I personally think it is because as you age the wine throughout time, right, you could start to have a lower feel of the wine because certain compounds like alcohol and water, they start to evaporate. Of course, people refill, but at certain point, you still have that headspace over there with air, with oxygen. I think that has a major effect of those kind of oxidation impact on the wine.
Are you saying that you could technically do that in anything, like any sort of vessel?
Yes, for example, nowadays, even in mostly stainless steel tank that people use, you can choose to integrate some oxygen. You don't even have to use machines, although there are some machines injecting oxygen slowly. But you can even just do, if you see some winemakers, they transfer from tank to tank, transfer wines from barrel to barrel. During the transfer process, you are allowing the wine to integrate oxygen into the wine. So that's actually an oxidation process.
So that's a technique that winemakers use then. So it sounds like if they want to let their wine breathe a little bit, get a certain style, that I guess a trick of the trade, if you want to call it.
I don't even think it's a trick. It's just like sometimes you just have to do that, right? You need to transfer wines from tank to barrel, from certain barrel. If you want to transfer to another new barrel, you do that. So naturally, you integrate those kind of things. But winemaking, in a lot of cases, is a piece of art. So you don't have to quantify it. So if you just practice that, if you do that, you just do that. And maybe over a long term, you can see that kind of effect. But honestly, nowadays, people tend to release most wines rather quickly. So you don't see that kind of very oxidized, matured wine styles nowadays.
So now your book, talk to us a little bit about what you learned, what you wrote about, and kind of what you explore and behind the glass.
Yes, so people start to ask me questions about why does a wine taste this way in this glass, right? And throughout years, through my education, through my own learning and all that, I'm like, okay, a lot of people, quite a few books actually, already start to talk about the chemistry side of wine tasting. But ever since I got into sensory science, I found out that the chemistry may not predict what you taste. For example, I'll give you a very interesting example. Okay, so if you think about most vanilla ice cream or vanilla yogurt, like vanilla flavored whatever food, right, or drinks. If you do chemistry, you would think that if you add more vanilla essence, that what we call the vanillin, that kind of compound, into the yogurt, into the ice cream, you would have stronger and stronger vanilla smell and taste. It doesn't work that way. We found out that in certain products, okay, let's say maybe yogurt, you add more vanilla, but at some point, people's sensitivity start to flatten out. Meaning, no matter how much more vanilla essence you add into the product,
You can only taste
people would not see a huge jump of the intensity of that kind of vanilla flavor. So that is why I think it's very important that when you develop your product, such as wine or any food and beverages, right? You make wine in a certain way. Yes, you can use chemistry to set up the foundation, but you do need to use human beings, human nose, human mouth, human eyes, human hearings, as tools to verify your product, especially if your product needs to sell in large volume. That is why all these kind of big food and beverage companies, such as Coca-Cola, Pepsi, those kind of companies, they all have sensory science departments. And that is why when I try to explain wine tasting fully, I combine the chemistry and the sensory part. So this book is called Behind the Glass, the chemical and the sensorial terroir of wine tasting.
Okay, so you're really more than anything like explaining to the person who's reading the book that why you smell the things that you do or why you taste the things that you do, in a sense?
Yes, this is essentially laying out the foundation of why you taste wine this way. But also there are two sort of hidden message I'm trying to convey, right? One is that we are still at the very early stage of understanding the science behind wine tasting. So in the book, I did address the things that we still don't know yet. So, but hopefully, and I believe that because of the fast development of the scientific world, right, we will be able to answer those kind of questions rather quickly. So maybe in the next 5 to 10 years, I need to revise my book and we'll have a completely different set of information. The other hidden message is that I really want people to not only understand the chemistry part of it, right? And lots of people, they may not be interested in the chemistry part of it, but I hope people understand that your palate, your perception at a single moment is to you. Nobody else can replicate that. So when you taste a wine, and even you taste with a master of wine, master sommelier, an expert, and they say, oh, I smell this bottle of Syrah wine that has black pepper smell. It's very strong. And you didn't smell that at all. That is your perception. In fact, the peppery smell in Syrah wines, we saw huge variabilities among people in terms of the sensitivity. So some people can immediately pick up the black pepper smell in Syrah red wines. And some people, they rarely can pick it up.
And does that make it harder for people who are trying to learn about wine, especially in like perspective that you're doing tests that are very black and white or kind of boxed in that this smells like this tastes like that, when it's such a personal thing?
Okay, two things. One is that most people don't need to smell that black pepper to enjoy wine, to enjoy anything, right? And the other thing is that even if you are doing a so-called wine exam, if they ask you to identify this wine is made from the Syrah grape, right? You don't have to smell that black pepper to identify. There are many other clues, such as the black fruit you can smell, such as the tannin structure you feel on the palate, such as lots of other things that you can actually make the conclusion is a Syrah without being able to smell the black pepper smell. There are always what we call anosmic or anosmia in terms of sense of smell among people. It's not better, you are better than the other, or you're worse than the other people's sense of smell. It's just smell, we can essentially differentiate billions or trillions of smell, different aroma compounds. We do not know how to describe or call all of them, but if we smell different compounds, right, we can definitely differentiate them. Or certain compounds, we cannot smell them, because it's just so many and the genetics is so complicated. And throughout evolution, we lose the sensitivity to certain smells. So that when people cannot smell something, it's fine and it doesn't destroy your enjoyment of those kind of things. And actually certain people are lucky not being able to smell certain things. For example, if you are not sensitive to certain green herbal-ish smell in certain wine, which certain people hate, you would enjoy the wine much better.
And again, at a most basic level, so then how do you become a better wine taster?
That needs definition, right? Because that's the thing that I actually dislike that term, better wine taster, because there's no such thing called a better wine taster. There is no standard saying if you don't taste this or if you don't recall this while tasting it, you are a worse wine taster. There's no such thing, I believe. And this is the exact thing that scare people about wine. Is that saying, oh, you cannot taste that, you haven't been through certain training, you don't talk the same language as certain wine experts, then you do not understand wine.
Or you don't belong.
It has nothing to do with your enjoyment of any food and product. I've been eating, let's say, dim sum for my whole life, right? And I still don't care about differentiating what's the so-called more premium dim sum versus the cheaper dim sum. I don't care. I enjoy any dim sum. I eat dim sum at the express place at the airport or in some even a bit of Americanized Chinese restaurants. I also enjoy dim sum at a very local place, regardless of the price or anything. Why do we do that, right? Of course, those kind of concept makes more sense if you sell certain wines that needs to be promoted as a more luxurious product. But that's the philosophy of working with any luxury products.
China, talk to us a little bit about, you kind of mentioned it already, but talk to us a little bit about what they're doing and kind of what their end goal is, I guess, if you know, or like style and quality of wine that they're looking to do.
Yeah, so it's at a very early stage because we essentially didn't develop the industry fast enough all the way until the 90s and early 2000s. As China joined WTO and really start to, become more globalized, we start to learn a lot about winemaking and the wine style and try to perform better in the market. But it's just such an early stage. Think about Napa in the 1960s, right? Only just Mondavi and a few wineries started to develop. And it took at least another 20 years to make a jump and another 20 years and another 20 years. And it also related to the economy and everything around it. So in China, the government is supporting it, which is good because you are making good use of certain agricultural land. And the wine grape is such a nice product in places where you do not grow rice again, right? And also the people, especially we see more and more younger generation of winemakers, they study in other places like UC Davis, like Australia, like France, all sorts of places. And some of them came back to China and start to grow grapes and make wines. So it's changing very fast. The biggest hurdle at the moment is the slowdown of economy and the weaker real estate and all that kind of things happened since and after COVID time in China. But people are heading there, and people are trying to do more quality and interesting things. Those people who, let's say, during the economy were good, some people just rush in to grow some grapes and make wines. And those people tend to fail, and they will be eliminated by the market. Those people who still hang there, I think when the economy came back and when China have another jump in terms of development and everything, we will see a huge scene of Chinese wines. So already some Chinese wines won some good award internationally. So we're going to see more and more of them.
Okay, so you think the quality is there where they can make wines that are comparable to like premier areas?
I don't ever compare Chinese wine style or quality to any of the regions. And this is the key because China has, of course, China is very big, but the places where they grow grapes, it's hard to find even similar climate, growing environment regions out there. Because first of all, China doesn't have a west coast, meaning not like California, we don't have a Mediterranean-like climate. Right, it's quite continental in certain places, and in some other places they have like semi-monsoonal climate, those kind of things. It's challenging, so we have to play the quality card in terms of we make wines that are balanced, not with all the diseased and faulty grapes, and that's the first step, and we are doing that well now. The next step is to make some unique grape varieties and styles that can stand out. We're getting there, but not there yet because it's still at the early stage. So for now, I don't compare with anything. It's nothing to compare with Napa. It's nothing to compare with Lodi. It's a very different soil.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It sounds like they're not trying to compete, but they're trying to find their own place in the market and be unique.
Yeah, in the past they tried to learn from Bordeaux, try to learn from even maybe Burgundy and places, right? These are like what I mentioned probably is set a good foundation, but now they start to see what's different in China in terms of the growing conditions as compared to these kind of so-called classic regions in the world. So I think it's a good move, but it's still very early. So we have to be patient, and there are interesting stuff out there. And I've been hosting some of the tastings and surprised quite a lot of people. So we're getting there.
Okay, and then do you host them in China or do you host them here? Or?
So here, because there are extremely difficult to get Chinese wines to here through importation because of the weird 3-tier distribution system in the US, very limited. But I hand carry some bottles from China back to here, like tasting with David's students and tasting with some of the industry folks. Informally, that's how I see the reaction from here. But in Europe, like especially in UK, in London, they've done quite a lot of the Chinese wine tastings already, and some of the wines have already been exported kind of successfully to those kind of markets.
Culturally, you've talked about this a little bit already too, but how big is wine in China? Like, you're saying like the younger generation.
The market is very small.
Okay.
But culturally, it is huge potential, and we see more and more people drinking wines, very small amount, okay, but the development is very fast in big cities like Beijing, Shanghai. Especially in Shanghai, you go to certain restaurants, even just local Chinese restaurants, some younger generation of people, they start to drink wines. So it's just so pleasing to see more people integrate wine as a part of the drink, part of the lifestyle products in daily life. But people need to keep in mind, despite the huge population, the percentage of people drinking wine, they're tiny. And the main reason is that our national drink is not wine. Our national drink is the baijiu, the liquor that I mentioned.
Gonna take time to break down or to adopt new customs or whatever, like into the culture, I guess.
Exactly, like America, it took a long time to develop this kind of wine culture, and think about prohibition and all that, right? It always takes time, but it's always gonna be better, but not in such a rushed and rapid way.
Now talk to us a little bit about your favorite wines, what you like to drink, because I know you're gonna give the political answer that what I like might not be what you like. Talk to us a little bit about what you enjoy.
I really enjoy more refreshing wines. Okay. I drink sparkling wines, whether it's more expensive champagne or cheaper Prosecco, Cava even. I also drink more white grapes than red grapes, red wines, simply because I like more refreshing stuff, such as Riesling. I drink a lot, whether it's dry or sweeter. I also drink lots of Sauvignon Blanc. I also drink a lot of refreshing Chardonnays. So my palate is really leaning towards the more refreshing side.
Is that because you don't really drink refreshing drinks and you get it through wine, or like, why do you think you like refreshing style?
I think mostly it's because of my lifestyle, which could resonate with some people's lifestyle, is that I work in the lab. After lab work, right, I just want to drink something refreshing. Fair. And I'm not a beer drinker because I'm sensitive to hops, the bitterness. So I appreciate certain beer, but I don't drink them as my daily drink. And I don't drink soda, soft drinks that often. So I prefer drinking refreshing wines. And also, back to lifestyle, I also travel tons. So when you travel internationally, especially, you want to drink something refreshing rather than a serious heavy red wine, right? And also to personal palate, I'm quite sensitive to tannins in red wines. Okay, sensitive doesn't mean I hate them. It's just I can perceive them strongly, although I can appreciate like big tannin Cabernet Sauvignon or Barolo, but I'm sensitive to them. So I don't drink them as my daily, weekly drink.
No, fair. And I'm the same way. So I think when we met each other and started talking about wine, we kind of connected. Yeah. All right. And then how do you recommend people learn more about wine just in general?
I think first you need to ask a question. Do you enjoy a diversity of food? When you go to a restaurant or when you have chance to explore new recipe, are you the type of person who always go for something interesting and new? If you are not that type of person, chances are your palate, whether it's for wine or for food, or your personality for wine and food, you tend to stick with the same thing. But as I mentioned, there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you enjoy it. But if you are a type of person who really has the desire and has the kind of past history of explore all sorts of food and drinks and all that, you are definitely a fast wine learner. You don't even have to read textbook. You just drink wines and try wines out there within your budget, and you will learn wine very fast.
All right, so it's kind of as we're wrapping up, maybe what are some of the things in wine that you mentioned that nobody really knows, as maybe some secret facts you can tell us as a scientist?
Say nobody knows by science.
The average person.
I wouldn't use everyone.
You know what I mean.
Scientifically, wine is probably, in terms of natural product, okay, wine is probably one of the most complex drinks out there in the world. If you don't count milk or blood or something like that, but wine is so complex just chemically. So sometimes I just think even a cheap bottle of wine, in the past you can get certain wines for $2, right? Even those wines, they're extremely complex in its chemical nature. That always fascinates me.
And then that's just through the natural process. You said that it's so diverse or different from any other natural drink.
It's grapes and fruits. They are already complex, but all fruits are kind of equally complex chemically. But then wine is fermented by yeast, and then certain bacteria can also do some microbial conversion, which is making it even more complex. And then you also may have some oak or some other influence that adds on the layer of complexity. So that is why wine is always kind of one of the most complex drinks.
Thank Gus for being on the show or being on the podcast. If you guys want to check out his book and learn more about what he's been talking about, something that I've read with the reviews is that you write in a style that is very digestible, that is very approachable, right? That you don't have to be a microbiologist or have some sort of chemistry background to understand what's going on, right?
You don't need scientific background. I tried. So I look forward to more feedback, but I tried in the way in terms of I really want to deliver this message. I use lots of real life examples, right? For example, when you see certain color of flower, that's exactly how certain colors in wine works, and all that kind of things. I try to connect all the points I try to make with what you can grab or see or explore in daily life. And I do hope people do that as well in your daily life, in terms of, especially for the taste and sense of smell. Try to pay attention to the smells around you. That will makes it much easier for you to understand the smells and the taste in wine. And if you do that often, you don't even need to read my book or use my book as a reference.
Yeah.
I really hope some people at some point can just use this book as a foundation or as a reference, so that they can, this book talk about this, but I don't need to recite that knowledge. I just need to know, because this plant or this animal or this type of fermented food like kimchi or cheese or something I encounter, is a similar way that how wine works, and I can find some similar group of chemicals or even similar sensory experience. So once you can make that connection, this book will be the reference as a foundation, and then you can just immediately click and enjoy wine.
And understand it, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then do you have any final words or some words of knowledge that you want to share with the audience today?
Yes, so when I drink wine, as I wrote in the book in the last page, I do not think about chemistry. I do not think about sensory science. When I drink wine, I just enjoy it. This is just a book I try to convey knowledge and information, but I'm a human being and I enjoy drinking and eating in a relaxing way with friends and family.
Sulfites, buzzword.
Yeah.
So talk to me or talk to the audience a little bit about why people get headaches or why people think sulfites are the reason behind why you get wine headaches, wine hangovers.
Dried fruit in the supermarket and you eat them and you don't feel a headache, then you are not sensitive to sulfite. You are not sensitive to sulfur. Because those dried fruit in the supermarket, they have probably 100 times more sulfites as compared to wine. So that brings the question is that it's most likely that it's the other compounds, such as you drank too much wine, you consume too much alcohol that caused you a headache. Or recently, my chemistry professor, they published a paper on some other compounds, such as some of the what we call the phenolic compounds, that's kind of associated with, let's say, tannins in wine, all those kind of things that could cause a headache. But people tend just to grab one thing and think this is good or bad. Especially nowadays, people, even some like health guidelines, government saying, oh, alcohol may not be good for your health. But if you study anything, you study any components in cheese, in any components in potato fries, any components in any of the snacks around there in the supermarket, right? They are toxic. They could cause problems. Yeah. So we are still not yet in a position in the scientific world saying this is the compound that cause certain health issues. It's much more complicated than that. But I can guarantee that if you eat that dried apricot or raisin or whatever things in the supermarket and you don't feel a headache, then it's not the sulfite in wine that makes you have a headache the next day.
And then the thing that does is still not understood?
No. And drink healthily, drink in moderation is the key, right?
Very much, Gus, for being on today. So we'll put all your information below if people want to reach out to you or learn a little bit more. Any other entrepreneurs or builders that want to hop on the show, my information is below. Don't forget to subscribe, guys. We can bring you more guests. All right, thank you, guys. Peace.